Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to share 4 truly unsettling school lockdown stories that actually happened. These aren't paranormal or made up, just real situations that show how scary these events can be. I've spoken with people who experienced these lockdowns firsthand, and their accounts reveal just how terrifying these situations can be when you're trapped inside a school with no information about what's happening. Let's get into it. The first story takes place at Jefferson High School in 2018. It was an ordinary Tuesday in November, and students were just finishing up third period. The halls were starting to fill with teenagers chatting about weekend plans, homework assignments, and the upcoming basketball game. 16-year-old Megan was at her locker, exchanging her history textbook for chemistry notes when the announcement came over the PA system. The principal's voice was different than usual, tense, controlled, but with an unmistakable edge of urgency. This is not a drill. We are in lockdown. All students and staff implement lockdown procedures immediately. The hallway froze for a split second before erupting into controlled chaos. Teachers emerged from classrooms, ushering students inside. Any classroom, not necessarily their own. Megan was quickly pulled into Mrs. Henderson's English class by a teacher she barely knew. The door was locked, lights turned off, and within moments, 30 students were huddled in the back corner of the room, as far from the windows and door as possible. Mrs. Henderson whispered instructions to stay absolutely silent and to turn phones to silent mode. No one knew what was happening. For nearly 2 hours, they sat in darkness, the only light coming from the occasional glow of a phone, as students desperately checked for information, texted parents, or read news alerts. What made this particularly terrifying wasn't just the uncertainty, it was that they could hear things. Around 40 minutes into the lockdown, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway outside. Slow, deliberate steps that paused outside each classroom door. Then came the sound that still haunts Megan's dreams. The metallic click and rattle of someone testing the doorknob to their classroom, trying to get in. Mrs. Henderson motioned for absolute silence, her finger pressed firmly to her lips as tears streamed down several students' faces. The handle jiggled again, more forcefully this time. Someone on the other side was trying to get in. Then a man's voice, unfamiliar and angry, muttered something inaudible before moving on to the next classroom. Later, they learned the truth. An armed man had entered the school looking for his ex-girlfriend, a language arts teacher who had recently filed a restraining order against him. He had somehow bypassed the front office security and made it into the building during class change when doors were briefly opened. The school resource officer had spotted him on security cameras and initiated the lockdown immediately. Police arrived within minutes, but it took time to search the large campus building by building. The man was eventually apprehended by police in the teacher's lounge without anyone getting hurt. But those students will never forget the sound of those doorknobs being tested while they sat in darkness, not knowing if they would make it home that day. I still get anxious whenever I hear a doorknob turning, Megan shared. It's been years, but that specific sound just takes me right back to that classroom. Our second story happened at a middle school in Oregon during what should have been an ordinary lunch period. Westridge Middle School had just implemented new security measures that fall, with staff receiving updated training on emergency protocols. Little did they know they'd be putting that training to use sooner than expected. It was 12:15 p.m. on a Wednesday when Principal Davis suddenly came on the intercom, his voice calm but firm. Teachers and staff, initiate lockdown procedures immediately. This is not a drill. The cafeteria, filled with nearly 200 students midway through lunch, fell silent for a moment before the trained cafeteria monitors sprang into action. They directed students to quickly and quietly move to the nearest classrooms, leaving behind half-eaten lunches and backpacks. 12-year-old Tyler was sitting with friends when the announcement came. At first, we thought it was another drill, he recalled. We'd had 2 that semester already. But something in the principal's voice made this feel different. Teachers rushed students from the cafeteria into nearby classrooms while those already in rooms locked doors and covered windows. What made this lockdown especially unsettling was the reason behind it. A former student who had been expelled 3 months earlier for making threats had returned to campus. The boy, whose name was withheld due to his age, had been spotted by a teacher entering a side door that had been propped open by a student. He was wearing a heavy backpack and had a hooded sweatshirt pulled low over his face. The teacher recognized him immediately and alerted the office. For over an hour, students hid under desks and in storage closets while armed police methodically searched the building room by room. Social studies teacher Ms. Roberts had 28 seventh graders crammed into her classroom storage closet, a space designed for supplies, not people. I had kids pressed against map rolls and textbook stacks, she remembered. Some were crying silently. I just kept whispering that everything would be okay, even though I wasn't sure myself. Seventh grader Emma had the presence of mind to record snippets of audio on her phone, hushed voices of her classmates crying and whimpering while their teacher tried to comfort them with whispered reassurances. The recording later became evidence in the investigation. The school's new silent alarm system had immediately alerted police, who arrived within 4 minutes of the lockdown being initiated. They established a perimeter and began a systematic search. Parents, alerted by text from their frightened children, gathered outside the police barricade, desperate for information. After an excruciating 72 minutes in lockdown, police finally found the former student hiding in a third-floor bathroom. The backpack that had caused so much concern turned out to contain only clothes and a notebook. He had apparently planned to stay at the school overnight to send a message to the administration who had expelled him. However, when police examined his phone, they found search history for school shootings and information about making improvised explosives. He was taken into custody and later charged with trespassing and making terroristic threats. While no one was physically harmed, the psychological impact on the school community was significant. The school brought in counselors for weeks afterward, and attendance dropped noticeably. "I still check where the exits are whenever I go into a room," said Tyler, now in high school. "That day changed how I see safety forever." The third incident occurred during what should have been a celebration at Westlake High School in California. It was Spirit Week, and the entire student body of over 1,200 students was gathered in the gymnasium for a morning pep rally. The cheerleaders had just finished their routine, and the principal, Dr. Hendricks, was about to announce the senior class homecoming court when his assistant hurried across the gym floor and handed him a note. Those in the front rows noticed the immediate change in his demeanor. He took a deep breath, approached the microphone, and with remarkable composure said, "Students and staff, I need everyone to quickly and quietly return to your homeroom classrooms for an emergency lockdown. This is not a drill. Teachers, implement lockdown procedures immediately." The gymnasium, moments before filled with cheering and music, fell into a tense hush before teachers began directing students to exit in an orderly fashion. Senior class president Jordan was seated in the front row when it happened. "It was surreal," she recalled. "One minute we're all hyped up about homecoming, and the next we're being told to hide. The scariest part was that we had no idea why." What the students didn't know as they filed back to their classrooms was that police had received a call about someone with what appeared to be a rifle walking toward the school. A parent dropping off a late student had reported seeing a young male in a dark jacket carrying what looked like a gun case, or possibly a disassembled rifle partially covered by a blanket. As students made their way back to homerooms, teachers were frantically counting heads and locking doors behind them. Some classrooms had 40 or more students crammed inside, far more than their normal capacity, as teachers prioritized getting everyone behind locked doors rather than sticking to assigned rooms. Jessica, a junior, described sitting in complete silence for 3 hours, the only sound being occasional police radio chatter from the hallway, as SWAT teams methodically cleared the building. "People were texting their parents that they loved them," she said. "I remember a boy near me was writing a note to his little sister in case something happened to him. We really thought we might die that day." The scariest part for many students was when SWAT officers began clearing rooms. They would unlock and burst into each classroom with weapons drawn, quickly scanning for threats before moving students into cleared areas. "When the door burst open and I saw those guns, my heart nearly stopped," remembered Eric, who was a freshman at the time. Even though they were there to help us, having rifles pointed in your direction, even briefly, is something you don't forget. After the entire campus was cleared, students were reunited with frantic parents at a nearby shopping center parking lot that had been designated as the reunification point. It turned out to be what police call a swatting incident. Someone had called in a false report with the intention of triggering a massive police response. Investigators later traced the call to an IP address in another state, but the person responsible was never identified. Even though it was ultimately a hoax, the psychological impact on students and staff was very real. The school brought in trauma counselors, and attendance was optional for the remainder of that week. Every loud noise in school made people jump for months afterward, Jordan said. And whenever we had scheduled lockdown drills later that year, some students would have panic attacks or just stay home that day. The fourth and final story takes place at Sunshine Elementary School in Florida, where the vulnerability of the youngest students made an already frightening situation even more distressing. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning in April, warm enough that Ms. Collins had taken her first grade class outside for their reading circle under the big oak tree near the playground. As the 6-year-olds took turns sounding out words from their readers, Ms. Collins noticed something that made her blood run cold. A strange man walking slowly around the playground perimeter, watching the children. He was dressed inappropriately for the warm weather in a long coat, and kept one hand in his pocket while using the other to periodically touch the chain-link fence. Something about his behavior set off alarm bells in her mind. Ms. Collins had been teaching for 22 years, and her instincts told her something was very wrong. She casually instructed her teaching assistant to gather the children and take them inside for a surprise activity, while she quickly called the front office on her cell phone. Within seconds, Principal Garcia's voice came over the outdoor and indoor speakers. Teachers and staff, implement lockdown procedures immediately. This is not a drill. What makes this story particularly disturbing is how kindergarten teacher Mrs. Rodriguez had to keep 25 5-year-olds completely silent while hiding in a supply closet barely big enough for all of them. They didn't understand the concept of a bad person potentially being in the school, she later explained. How do you make a kindergartner understand the need for complete silence without traumatizing them? She described singing very quiet songs with them and telling them it was a special silence game where the best quiet class would get extra recess time. She had them practice butterfly breathing, taking deep breaths with their hands fluttering like wings to keep them calm and quiet. Meanwhile, first grade teacher Ms. Collins was dealing with her own classroom of young children who had seen her reaction to the man outside and were more aware that something frightening was happening. One little girl asked me if the bad man was going to hurt us, Ms. Collins recalled, her voice breaking. How do you answer that honestly without causing panic? I just told her that our school had special doors to keep us safe, and the police were coming to help us. Outside, police discovered the man was James Thornton, a recently released convict with a history of violence against women and children who had somehow gotten onto school grounds despite the security measures. He was apprehended trying to enter through a side door that led directly to the kindergarten wing. When officers searched him, they found a hunting knife and zip ties in his coat pockets. Later, security footage showed he had been watching the school for days, learning the schedule and routine of the staff and students. He had been particularly focused on when and where the youngest children had their outdoor activities. What haunts me most is the premeditation, said Officer Ramirez, who was first on the scene. This wasn't random. He had been planning this, watching these little kids, learning their routines. The lockdown lasted nearly 2 hours as police thoroughly searched the entire campus to ensure there were no accomplices. For Mrs. Rodriguez, keeping 25 kindergartners silent and calm for that long was perhaps the greatest challenge of her teaching career. I had children who needed to use the bathroom, who were hungry, who didn't understand why we were all crammed in a dark closet instead of having snack time, she recalled. I was singing the quietest songs I've ever sung, making up stories in whispers, anything to keep them from crying out or getting scared. Parents were notified of the lockdown via the school's emergency alert system, creating a chaotic scene outside as hundreds of frightened adults gathered beyond the police perimeter. The reunification process took hours, with each child being individually checked out to verified guardians. In the aftermath, the school installed additional security cameras, reinforced all exterior doors, and implemented a buddy system where teachers would no longer take classes outside alone. The most profound change, however, was in how the teachers viewed their responsibility. I realized that day that I wasn't just responsible for teaching these children to read and write, said Ms. Collins. I was potentially responsible for keeping them alive. That changes how you see your job forever. These 4 stories remind us that while lockdowns are designed to keep students and staff safe, they can be genuinely traumatic experiences that leave lasting psychological impacts. Teachers and students often have no idea what's happening during these events, which makes them all the more frightening. The uncertainty, not knowing if there's a real threat, how serious it is, or how long they'll be locked down, compounds the fear. For many students, these experiences fundamentally change their sense of safety at school. Several of the people interviewed for these stories mentioned developing anxiety, hypervigilance, or post-traumatic stress symptoms afterward. Schools increasingly recognize the need for psychological support following such events, even when no physical harm occurs. The emotional safety of students is just as important as their physical safety, noted Dr. Keller, a school psychologist who has worked with several districts on post-lockdown mental health initiatives. We're seeing more schools implementing trauma-informed approaches to help students process these experiences. Perhaps most disturbing is how lockdowns have become normalized in American education. No longer rare emergency measures, but regular occurrences that students and teachers must be prepared for. Regular drills, while necessary, serve as constant reminders of potential danger. I remember when fire drills were the only safety drills we did, reflected Principal Garcia from Sunshine Elementary. Now we train for active threats the same way we train for natural disasters. It's a sad reality of modern education. If you've ever experienced a lockdown situation at school, whether as a student, teacher, or parent, feel free to share your story in the comments below. These experiences, while difficult to talk about, help others understand the real impact of these events. And as always, stay safe, everyone.